DE really overbuffed Knell Prime compared to regular Knell. Doubled critical chance, doubled status chance, more critical damage, more fire rate, everything's up, apart from magazine size. So how does that play out as a whole? On headshots we get a death knell buff which multiplies total critical damage. Regular knell was top tier even with its relatively low critical multiplier of 1.5, and that's because death knell buff adds multiplicatively after the mods. Added critical chance basically means you don't only get more critical damage, but you nearly double it, because orange crits are very easy to achieve. Ginger crits are not that hard to get either. So critical potential alone would be enough to put Knell Prime as an S tier weapon, so you can guess how the rest plays out. Worth noting is that because of that headshot requirement to run this weapon, it's not particularly good weapon versus lower level enemies. Once enemies become strong enough to take a couple of hits, is where this weapon starts to shine. And it's not just because of the player's accuracy, but there's also wonky hitboxes that impede this weapon. But when levels grow higher in endurance, you can basically maintain death knell for 24/7. For the build, I went with all the galvanized mods. Critical chance on max stacks of galvanized crosshairs goes to 168%, which is a viable orange crit. Death knell boosts status chance as well, so viral plus heat in the build is really a help if you want to run galvanized shot. Of course, we can't leave out critical damage because of that multiplicative buff we talked about. Lethal torrent for multi-shot and fire rate because you can't have enough fire rate on the weapon that has infinite ammo. My Riven has toxin, punch through and critical damage. If you don't have a Riven, using toxin only is more than good enough. For Exiles mod, I use stabilizer, because when combined with secondary deadhead's recoil mitigation, you basically lose all the recoil, even when not zoomed in. Of course, when you zoom out, you lose galvanized crosshair buff, but weapon having 40% base critical chance, it's still more than a viable weapon, because you hit yellow crits almost half the time. No recoil really helps you get out of that Cyclops mode. Zoom is cool and all, but it's not always needed. Death knell bonuses apply even when you're not zoomed in. Some crowd control can definitely help you, at least trigger the buff, but it should anyway help you anytime you want to hit more headshots. Sevagod's Gloom can be put on any warframe, and as long as you can maintain energy with it, it'll help you a lot with those headshots. But since warframe is more of a horde shooter, aiming is not that big of a deal. Just put mouse on headshot level towards the crowd and use AD/AD to strafe into headshot. I generally shoot less of those opportunistic shots with Knell, because keeping that buff is more valuable. And that's basically the only drawback of the weapon. You do give away some flexibility with certain setups, but when you go versus very heavy and tanky boys, it's a golden thing to have in your pocket. Since build has galvanized shot, you can also prime for Knell to escalate damage, which is generally needed against Demolish. What would be another drawback of Knell, but it's not its fault, is just wonky hitboxes in warframe, and with them the erratic behavior of enemies. It can be mildly frustrating to have clear headshot not register when you depend on it. I guess it would be interesting to get magazine size on the Riven, have like toxin, magazine size and punch through. Even with low disposition, if stat is under 50%, we could still add Ice Storm as our core mod and keep that viral, but have 2 shots in the magazine without major sacrifices in the build. Punch through is very nice on it as well, because even if you miss a headshot of whoever is first in line, headshots behind count towards hitting the buff. And again, warframe being a horde shooter, it's pretty common to get lineups on enemies. In general, I feel like all non-explosive firearms should have punch through by default, but you can't always get what you want. Also, using warframes who can buff fire rate is just free buff to this weapon because of infinite ammo. Also, using frames where you can dedicate an arcane slot for arcane velocity is pretty cool. Another tip I'd give you is reloading the weapon while you have Death Knell buff maxed out. You don't lose the buff while reloading, but you won't have to reload later on when your damage might be needed ASAP. Using both galvanized crosshairs and prime pistol gambit is possible, and it will push the Knell to ginger crits, and that's definitely one of the ways to build Knell Prime. Just with this, I wanted to go with high scaling, viral to help the damage to health, key to strip armor, and have some tick damage, both to escalate damage with galvanized shot alongside 3 physical damage types, and so on. But you're a master of your own build. Thank you for watching, consider subscribing because it's free and it helps me out a bunch, and I'll see you in the next one.